The scanner flashed crimson as she stepped forward, a single unarmed woman against a cathedral of steel and alien arrogance. Human detected. Designation Alibaba Yaga. Warning, do not engage. Her polite apology, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hold up the line, contrasted with the general's sneers. This isn't a story about brute force. It's about how patience and politeness become weapons when everyone underestimates you. They called it Sentinel's Gate, but the name lied. This wasn't a defensive structure. It was a monument to their own supremacy. A declaration carved in steel and glowing energy fields. The archway stood 500 meters high, designed specifically to make approaching vessels feel like insects crawling toward a giant's boot. Every surface shimmered with weapon emplacements disguised as architectural flourishes, all angled downward to emphasize who stood above and who crawled below. From their observation deck suspended high above the docking bay, the alien generals watched human arrivals with the detached curiosity of scientists observing lesser life forms. They lounged in contoured chairs that adjusted to their physiologies, sipping liquids that shimmered with captured starlight. Their posture spoke of complete ownership of the space beneath them. One general gestured dismissively toward the processing lines far below, his armored fingers tracing patterns in the air that summoned tactical displays no human technology could decode. Their military doctrine rested on a simple, brutal premise: visible power prevents conflict. Why waste resources on subtlety when overwhelming display achieves the same result? They built ships that blotted out stars, armor that deflected planetary bombardment, weapons that could crack moons. To them, an unarmed human represented nothing worth measuring. The absence of visible weapons meant absence of threat. This wasn't assessment, it was prejudice dressed as tactical analysis. History's battle records, both human and alien, consistently show one pattern repeating: the conqueror who cannot imagine being conquered. The confident general who dismisses the ragged enemy. The mighty empire that cannot conceive of a rival's patience. These alien commanders had studied conflict, but they'd failed to study arrogance. They didn't recognize it in themselves because they believed their confidence was earned, not chosen. Their physical positioning reinforced this perceptual hierarchy. The observation deck gave them literal superiority, looking down on arrivals from a height that forced necks to crane. The lighting cast their faces in shadow while illuminating the subjects below under harsh interrogation lights. Every design choice, from the angle of the staircases to the placement of security scanners, communicated one message: you are being permitted entry, not earning it. This architectural arrogance created their first strategic blind spot. They designed their fortress against fleets and armies, against orbital bombardment and siege warfare. They hadn't designed it against a single woman carrying a duffel bag. Their security systems scanned for energy signatures, weapons profiles, and combat cybernetics. They didn't scan for patience. They didn't register tactical humility. Their contempt became the perfect environment for psychological operations. By dismissing humans as insignificant, they created space for humanity to operate unseen. Underestimation is the finest camouflage. While they watched for obvious threats, the real danger moved through their security checks wearing the mask of harmlessness. The first warning arrived not as a blaring alarm, but as a flicker on a secondary monitoring screen. A junior technician noted the anomaly, but the generals dismissed it as system noise. They were watching the human woman place her bag on the conveyor, her movements calm and unhurried. They didn't see the threat. They saw what they expected to see: another minor biological entity processing through their magnificent gate. The security scanner bled crimson. Not caution yellow, not advisory orange. This was arterial red, the specific shade reserved for planetary-level threats. The light pulsed across the console in the surveillance bay, throwing stark shadows across the faces of technicians who'd never seen that particular alert activate. It mapped the outline of a single human female, placing a worn duffel bag on the inspection conveyor. Her movements remained calm, almost languid. As the system painted her in nightmare colors, the text designation flashed alongside the visual alert: Alibaba Yaga, do not engage. Military-grade artificial intelligence doesn't waste processing power on poetic designations. When a system tags something with a specific name rather than a threat number, it means pattern recognition has matched against verified intelligence. The system wasn't guessing, it was recalling. That particular crimson only activated for entities that had previously demonstrated catastrophic capability. One of the junior officers gestured toward the display, his voice tight. "Sir, the primary scanner." The senior general cut him off with a dismissive wave. "Translation error. Human names always confuse the semantic processors." Another commander chuckled. "Probably means harmless traveler in their primitive tongue." They leaned back in their chairs, the alert already dismissed as technological static. Their confidence in their own systems ended where their prejudice began. Advanced military organizations consistently demonstrate one fatal flaw. They trust their assessments more than their sensors. Cognitive bias filters raw data through layers of assumption. When reality contradicts expectation, the tendency is to dismiss the anomaly rather than question the framework. These commanders had decided humans posed no serious threat. Their technology reached the opposite conclusion. Rather than re-examine their position, they assumed the machines had malfunctioned. The specificity of the designation suggested troubling gaps in their intelligence. Alibaba Yaga wasn't a random assignment. It carried cultural and tactical connotations their databases should have contained. Their surveillance of humanity had focused on fleet movements, weapons development, and political structures. They'd cataloged missiles but missed myths. They tracked warships but ignored warning stories told to children. Their intelligence was comprehensive yet fundamentally incomplete. Their own security systems recognized what their commanders refused to see. The AI had no ego, no political considerations, no cultural blind spots. It simply matched patterns against its threat database and delivered the verdict. The machine knew this particular human configuration represented existential danger. The general saw a woman in simple clothing carrying a bag. The system saw a known catastrophic agent. This dismissal became their second critical error. They'd already underestimated the physical threat. Now they ignored the technological warning. The machine gave them clear, unambiguous data, wrapped in emergency protocols. They treated it as background noise. Had they heeded the alert, they might have initiated security protocols that could have changed the encounter. Instead, they continued watching with bemused contempt as the woman waited patiently for her bag to clear inspection. The scanner's crimson glow reflected in her eyes as she looked up toward the observation deck. She didn't react to the alarm only they could see. Her expression remained politely neutral. She knew what their systems were telling them. She also knew they wouldn't listen. They called it deference. Her quiet apology as the scanner glowed crimson seemed like submission. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hold up the line." The generals watched from above, their postures relaxing further. They saw another human displaying the expected inferiority complex. Their own culture valued aggressive confidence. Politeness registered as weakness. This misinterpretation became their third critical error. Advanced interrogation techniques rely on predictable patterns. When a subject behaves exactly as expected, guards lower their vigilance. The human woman performed perfect expected behavior. Apologetic, non-threatening, slightly awkward. She gave them exactly what their prejudice demanded. They never considered that courtesy could be tactical rather than cultural. Politeness disarms more effectively than aggression in certain contexts. An aggressive approach triggers defensive protocols. Courtesy creates confusion. Security personnel train for hostility, not for excessive civility. Her calm demeanor contrasted sharply with their armored grandeur. The contrast made them feel more secure in their superiority, less attentive to potential threats. Research across multiple species shows that unexpected courtesy often precedes strategic advantage. Negotiations that begin with exaggerated politeness tend to conclude with one party gaining disproportionate benefits. The polite party appears conciliatory while actually positioning for maximum leverage. The generals missed the pattern because they viewed humans as incapable of such sophistication. The woman listened politely, her head slightly tilted as the generals detailed their surveillance operations. She didn't interrupt. She didn't react. She stood in perfect baseball stance. They called it Operation Long Watch, while the alien generals proudly displayed their surveillance capabilities, detailing how they'd monitored human fleet movements and weapons development. They never considered the possibility they were being watched in return. Their arrogance created a perfect blind spot. They believed intelligence gathering flowed only from advanced to primitive civilizations. never considering that humanity might be conducting deeper, more patient reconnaissance. Human operatives had been embedded within alien trading delegations, cultural exchange programs, and even maintenance crews for years. They didn't carry obvious surveillance equipment or attempt dramatic intelligence theft. Instead, they observed patterns. They noted which commanders arrived late to briefings, which security guards consistently skipped protocol checks, which systems required frequent maintenance. They mapped daily routines, learned cultural taboos, and identified cognitive biases. While the aliens watched for missile launches, humans watched coffee breaks. Advanced intelligence operations recognized that the most valuable information often comes from indirect observation. Human analysts studied alien entertainment media, not for content but for production values that revealed technological capabilities. They analyzed waste management systems to understand resource allocation. They observed diplomatic protocols to map power structures. The aliens focused on counting warships while humans were counting minutes between shift changes. Prolonged observation reveals what short-term surveillance misses. A week of watching might show security patterns. A year reveals which patterns are theater and which are actual procedure. Human observers noted that alien security drills always occurred at the same time each rotation, allowing personnel to prepare rather than testing actual readiness. They saw that system maintenance was consistently deferred during diplomatic functions, creating regular vulnerabilities. Their arrogance made counter-observation unthinkable. The aliens believed their technology and cultural sophistication placed them beyond human comprehension. They never considered that humanity might be studying them with the patience of archaeologists examining ancient artifacts. Every cultural exchange, every trade negotiation, every diplomatic visit became an intelligence-gathering opportunity the aliens provided willingly. The humans learned their rhythms. They knew which commanders relied on automated systems rather than personal assessment. They identified which junior officers showed initiative and which simply followed orders. They mapped the circadian rhythms of entire shift rotations, finding the precise minutes when alertness dropped between stimulant doses. They learned which cultural references triggered emotional responses and which were ignored. Cognitive biases became particularly valuable intelligence. The humans noted that alien commanders consistently overvalued technological solutions while underestimating psychological factors. They observed that security personnel trusted automated systems even when those systems showed clear errors. They documented how arrogance prevented course correction even when evidence mounted. The resolution became starkly clear in retrospect. The intelligence advantage had already shifted to humanity before the woman ever approached Sentinel's gate. The generals believed they were revealing their surveillance capabilities to impress a primitive species. Actually, they were confirming what human intelligence already knew while revealing gaps in their understanding. Every detail they shared about their observation of humanity helped humans understand what the aliens had missed. This intelligent superiority set up the technological revelation. While the generals focused on external threats and visible capabilities, human operatives had been studying their systems from within. They didn't need to hack networks when they could observe maintenance routines. They didn't require password theft when they could watch technicians input codes. The patient observation had created perfect conditions for infiltration. The fortress wasn't about to be attacked, it had already been opened from the inside. They called it perfect security. The generals monitored their tactical displays showing clear space for light years in every direction. Their external sensors scanned constantly for approaching vessels, weapons signatures, fleet formations. Every alarm and protocol focused outward. The concept of internal threat never entered their calculations. Their defensive philosophy assumed threats would announce themselves with dramatic approach. They never considered the possibility that the danger had already arrived years earlier. Human ships weren't approaching. They'd been integrated into the alien formation for 37 standard rotations. Their vessels occupied designated positions within the defensive perimeter, their identification codes appearing in maintenance logs and traffic control records as legitimate presences. The aliens monitored external approaches while human commanders drank coffee in officers' mess halls just 3 decks below the surveillance center. The threat wasn't coming. It was already pouring the coffee. Advanced cloaking technology provided part of the concealment. Human vessels used energy diffusion systems that made them appear as background sensor noise rather than solid objects. But the true concealment came from psychological blind spots. The aliens expected deception to look like deception. They searched for hidden ships in asteroid fields and nebulae. They didn't think to look among the supply vessels and diplomatic transports they themselves had invited into their space. Their surveillance priorities reflected this external fixation. 94% of sensor arrays pointed outward toward potential approach vectors. Internal monitoring focused on personnel movements and routine security checks, rather than vessel verification. Their system assumed that anything already inside the perimeter had been properly vetted. This assumption became their critical vulnerability. Research across military history shows that most security breaches occur due to internal blind spots rather than external penetration. Fortresses fall because guards stop checking identification at familiar gates. Networks get compromised because administrators trust internal traffic. The aliens built magnificent defenses against invasion, while leaving the side door unlocked for invited guests. The human ships positioned themselves during years of routine interactions. Each diplomatic visit included auxiliary vessels that never quite left. Every trade mission left behind maintenance craft that supposedly required extended docking. Cultural exchange programs brought research vessels that needed to remain for ongoing studies. The aliens welcomed these presences as symbols of human interest in their culture. They never considered them tactical placements. Their arrogance prevented serious consideration of internal threats. The concept that humans could orchestrate such long-term placements seemed absurd. It required patience spanning decades, coordination across multiple governments, and strategic vision beyond what they believed humans possessed. They dismissed the possibility because it contradicted their assessment of human capabilities. Their prejudice blinded them to the evidence accumulating in their own docking logs. The resolution became tragically clear when the woman finally activated her systems. The fortress had been compromised long before she ever approached Sentinel's gate. Human operators already controlled key power relays, communication nodes, and defensive system interfaces. Their ships weren't there to attack, they were there to prevent resistance. The external threat display showed clear space in all directions, while the actual threat sat comfortably within weapons range of every critical system. This systemic compromise set up the final confrontation. The generals still believed they controlled the situation. They watched the single human woman while human teams moved through their corridors with perfect access. They monitored external sensors while internal systems gradually shifted control. The takeover wouldn't require storming the gates. The gates were already open. The woman reached into her duffel bag and removed a simple worn coin. The generals focused on this primitive object, their attention captured by the apparent non sequitur. They didn't realize the coin wasn't currency. It was a synchronization device, the final piece in a plan decades in the making. They called it a primitive relic. The woman drew a worn coin from her duffel bag, its surface smoothed by centuries of handling. The alien generals watched with a mixture of contempt and confusion. One of them muttered about sentimental artifacts. Another speculated it might be some form of primitive technology. Their dismissal became their final strategic error. The coin wasn't currency. It was a precision-engineered synchronization device wrapped in historical camouflage. Its composition contained embedded resonators tuned to specific frequencies. The battered appearance served as perfect disguise. Who would suspect tactical significance in something that looked like pocket change? Advanced systems often employ simple, reliable triggers for complex operations. Complexity creates failure points. Simplicity creates certainty. The coin flip served dual purposes. As psychological demonstration, it showcased absolute control. The woman stood in their fortress surrounded by advanced weaponry and performed a casually human gesture. The act itself communicated that she operated on a different operational timeline. While they focused on immediate threats, she engaged in ritual. The metallic click that followed would resonate through more than just the chamber air. Research across military history consistently shows simple tools outperforming complex technology in critical moments. Emergency signals use whistle blasts rather than encoded messages. Dead drops employ chalk marks rather than digital signatures. The most effective triggers often look like nothing important. The aliens' dependence on advanced systems made them vulnerable to simpler solutions. They monitored energy signatures and data streams. They didn't monitor coin flips. The metallic click echoed through the chamber with unnatural clarity. The sound propagated through air and structure simultaneously. It resonated along power conduits, through communication lines across sensor networks. The coin's acoustic signature matched precisely with activation protocols, embedded in alien systems during years of routine maintenance. Human technicians had built resonant triggers into seemingly unrelated components. The click didn't just mark a moment, it initiated one. Their technological dependence became their undoing. The aliens trusted complex systems to detect complex threats. Their security algorithms looked for sophisticated intrusion patterns. A coin flip registered as background noise. A simple sound wave didn't trigger any alarms because it wasn't recognized as a threat vector. Their sophistication created the blind spot that simplicity exploited. The resolution arrived in synchronized silence. Throughout the fortress, status lights shifted from blue to green. Control consoles that had responded to alien commands now answered to different controllers. Weapon systems that had threatened outward now pointed inward. Communication channels that had carried alien voices now transmitted human commands. The takeover didn't require violent intrusion. It required a single acoustic trigger. The generals stared at their displays as the changes propagated. One commander reached for his sidearm only to find the weapons locker sealed. Another tried to activate emergency protocols but received invalid command errors. Their technology remained physically present, but functionally alienated. The systems responded perfectly, just not to them. This moment revealed the full extent of their technological compromise. The human operation hadn't been about defeating their systems, but about adopting them. The patient observation, the cultural infiltration, the strategic placement, all culminated in this silent transition of control. The coin flip was merely the final domino in a chain placed years earlier. The woman caught the coin and slipped it back into her pocket. Her expression remained neutral. She hadn't come to fight their technology. She had come to collect it. The generals finally understood they weren't dealing with an invasion force. They were witnessing an ownership transfer. Their own systems were turning against them, following protocols written by hands they had dismissed as primitive. They called it absolute control. The alien generals assumed command of their systems remained unquestioned. Their fingers rested on control panels that responded to biometric verification. Their voices activated security protocols. Their eyes monitored status displays that showed all systems nominal. This assumption became their final operational error. Their technology hadn't been hacked in the conventional sense. It had been gradually adopted over years of patient infiltration. Human operators now controlled defensive systems through backdoors installed during routine maintenance. The massive orbital cannons that could vaporize asteroids now answered to human command codes. Point defense systems that protected against missile attacks now targeted internal security positions. The shift occurred silently without alert triggers. Because the humans hadn't broken encryption, they had become authorized users with highest privileges. Communications networks fell under human control simultaneously. Every channel, from tactical frequencies to internal administrative messaging, now routed through human-monitored filters. Alien commanders issuing orders found their transmissions delayed, altered, or simply lost in digital limbo. Attempts to contact external reinforcements received automated responses indicating system maintenance. The networks remained technically functional, while becoming strategically useless. Power distribution systems shifted control with particular elegance. Human technicians had spent years studying the grid's vulnerabilities during cultural exchange programs. They identified which substations controlled life support, which relays managed defensive systems, which nodes handled communications. When the takeover occurred, they didn't need to shut down power. They merely redirected it. Critical systems received reduced capacity, while non-essential functions continued uninterrupted, creating confusion rather than crisis. Advanced cyber warfare operates on the principle of persistence rather than penetration. The humans built access points during years of authorized presence. They didn't attack firewalls, they became system administrators with legitimate credentials. Their infiltration was so gradual that security protocols never registered it as threat activity. The aliens monitored for dramatic intrusion attempts, while the actual takeover occurred through accumulated permissions. Research across military domains indicates that most advanced forces are vulnerable to this form of systemic compromise. The more complex the technology, the more entry points exist for authorized users. The aliens' technological sophistication created countless vulnerabilities they never considered because they equated complexity with security. Their systems were so advanced that they couldn't imagine someone patiently learning them over decades. The humans built doors rather than breaking walls. Each cultural exchange, each trade mission, each diplomatic visit created new access opportunities. Human technicians performing routine maintenance installed hidden command channels. Diplomatic aides studying alien culture mapped security protocols. Traders delivering goods identified logistical vulnerabilities. The aliens welcomed these interactions as demonstrations of their cultural superiority. They never recognized them as systematic infiltration. Their technological superiority became their ultimate vulnerability. The very systems designed to protect them now threatened them. Weapons platforms responded to human voice commands while ignoring alien biometrics. Security doors opened for human personnel while locking out alien commanders. Communication systems carried human transmissions while blocking alien distress calls. The takeover was complete, silent, and utterly demoralizing. The resolution arrived without dramatic confrontation. Alien generals watched their own defensive displays show weapons tracking internal positions rather than external threats. They saw security cameras revealing human teams moving freely through restricted areas. They attempted emergency protocols that returned error messages. Their technology functioned perfectly. It simply no longer answered to them. This systemic betrayal led directly to the non-violent surrender. Resistance became literally impossible when their own weapons pointed inward. The fortress hadn't been stormed. It had been turned inside out. The humans controlled every system, every weapon, every communication channel. The alien commanders stood surrounded by their own magnificent technology, all of it waiting for human commands. The battle ended before it could begin, lost to patient infiltration rather than overwhelming force. They called it the final assault. The alien generals braced for violence, their hands moving toward weapon controls, their postures tensing for combat. They expected boarding parties breaching airlocks, explosive charges detonating doors, the cacophony of close-quarters fighting. Their military doctrine recognized only one form of takeover: violent, overwhelming force. This expectation became their ultimate strategic blind spot. Human Marines entered through already open doors. They moved in precise formations down corridors cleared by controlled security systems. Their weapons remained holstered. Their armor showed no combat damage. They encountered alien security personnel who stood confused as their own defensive systems ignored human movement while locking alien responses. The takeover resembled a scheduled changing of guards rather than military assault. Advanced psychological operations made physical violence unnecessary. The humans had already won the conflict through control of systems and information. The Marines served as visual confirmation of victory rather than instruments of conquest. Their calm movements through the fortress demonstrated that resistance would be pointless rather than difficult. This psychological impact proved more effective than any display of force. Complete system control rendered physical resistance impossible. Alien soldiers found their weapons deactivated by remote command. Security doors remained sealed against them while opening for human personnel. Communication devices provided only soothing automated messages about system updates. Attempts to organize resistance met with perfect frustration as every tool and system answered to different controllers. Research across military history shows that absolute system control often makes physical confrontation irrelevant. When one side controls environment, communications, and weapon systems, the other side possesses only biological determination against technological inevitability. The aliens retained their courage and training but lost all means to apply them. Their magnificent fortress became a beautifully crafted prison. The humans demonstrated that true power doesn't require forced demonstration. Their Marines moved with calm authority rather than aggressive posturing. They spoke polite commands rather than shouted threats. They secured positions through system control rather than firepower. The absence of violence became more intimidating than any display of destructiveness could have been. Their expectation of violent conflict blinded them to non-violent takeover possibilities. The aliens had prepared for sieges and assaults. They'd fortified against breaching and bombardment. They hadn't prepared for their own technology turning against them. Their strategic imagination stopped at the point of physical confrontation. never considering that battle could be won before the first shot was never fired. The fortress fell without combat occurring. Human personnel assumed control stations. Alien commanders were politely escorted to detention quarters. Weapons systems powered down under new administration. The transition occurred with the quiet efficiency of a scheduled shift change. The only sounds were the hum of functioning systems and the measured footsteps of human teams securing the facility. This nonviolent resolution demonstrated the final evolution of their strategic error. The aliens had built magnificent walls against external threats while leaving internal vulnerabilities unguarded. They'd prepared for war while their opponents prepared for ownership. The humans didn't conquer the fortress. They simply collected what they had already gained through patience and infiltration. The occupation began without ceremony. Human technicians sat at alien consoles, their fingers moving across controls designed for different physiologies. Alien systems responded perfectly to new operators. The fortress continued functioning exactly as designed, just under different management. The transition was so seamless that external monitoring stations detected no abnormality in operations. The woman watched from the central control room as status reports flowed across screens. Her duffel bag sat beside her chair, the coin resting in her pocket. She hadn't needed to fire a weapon or issue a threat. The victory had been achieved through understanding rather than destruction, through patience rather than aggression. The monsters they feared weren't outside their walls. They were the assumptions inside their minds. They called it strategic focus. The alien generals built their magnificent fortress against external threats, their sensors scanning deep space for approaching fleets, their weapons aimed outward at potential invaders. They prepared for massive assault formations and orbital bombardment. This external fixation became their fundamental error. The actual threat wasn't approaching from beyond their defenses. It was already growing within their own psychological blind spots, nurtured by their unshakable confidence. Advanced military strategy consistently demonstrates this pattern. Commanders focus on visible external dangers while internal vulnerabilities develop unnoticed. The generals studied human fleet movements and weapons development with meticulous attention. They completely missed the more subtle infiltration occurring through cultural exchanges and diplomatic missions. Their surveillance covered external threats while internal compromise progressed unchecked. Their arrogance prevented meaningful self-assessment. They never questioned their assumptions about human capabilities. They never examined their cultural biases. They never considered that their technological superiority might create dependency vulnerabilities. This lack of internal scrutiny became their critical weakness. The fortress had strong walls but fragile foundations. Research across military history indicates that most catastrophic failures originate internally rather than externally. Systems collapse from unexamined assumptions, not overwhelming force. Command structures fracture from cultural blindness, not superior tactics. The aliens prepared for spectacular attacks while the actual threat manifested through gradual, patient exploitation of existing weaknesses. The monster under their bed wasn't human aggression. It was their own unexamined cognitive biases. Their belief in technological determinism blinded them to psychological factors. Their cultural superiority complex prevented understanding human strategy. Their operational arrogance made them dismiss warnings as anomalies. These internal flaws created the perfect environment for systemic compromise. Humanity simply exploited vulnerabilities that already existed. The aliens' dependence on automated systems created openings for gradual takeover. Their cultural contempt allowed human operatives to operate openly within their spaces. Their technological confidence made them blind to simpler solutions. The humans didn't create weaknesses. They discovered and utilized them. Their downfall came from within their own command structure and operational philosophy. The external threat never materialized because it wasn't necessary. The internal vulnerabilities provided complete access without resistance. The fortress fell to its own neglected weaknesses rather than external strength. This internal focus leads to the final understanding of human strategy. While the aliens looked outward, humanity studied inward. They examined alien psychology, cultural patterns, and operational blind spots. They learned not how to defeat alien technology, but how to understand alien thinking. The victory came through comprehension rather than confrontation. The resolution becomes clear in retrospect. The real battle occurred in the space between assumption and reality. The aliens assumed their technology guaranteed security. They assumed their cultural superiority ensured dominance. They assumed human inferiority prevented serious threat. These assumptions became the weapons used against them. Human strategy focused on the internal landscape rather than external confrontation. They mapped cognitive biases instead of fleet formations. They studied cultural patterns instead of weapon specifications. They understood that true power lies in understanding the enemy's mind rather than matching their technology. The transition to human control demonstrated this fundamental difference in approach. The aliens sought to dominate through visible power. The humans sought to understand through patient observation. One strategy created magnificent but vulnerable fortresses. The other created subtle but unbreakable control. This understanding completes their psychological defeat. They realized they weren't defeated by superior force but by superior understanding. Their own arrogance blinded them to internal weaknesses that became their undoing. The monster they feared was never outside their gates. It was the unexamined confidence within their command center. The final realization settles over them like cold gravity. They built perfect defenses against external threats while leaving internal vulnerabilities completely exposed. Their focus on visible power made them blind to subtle strategy. Their contempt for human culture prevented recognizing strategic intelligence. Their downfall came not from what humanity brought to their doorstep, but from what they already carried within themselves. They called it strategic impatience. The alien commanders operated on 5-year planning cycles, annual budget reviews, quarterly readiness assessments. Their doctrine valued immediate results and visible demonstrations of power. This short-term focus became their ultimate strategic limitation. They could project force across star systems but couldn't conceive of plans spanning generations. Humanity's greatest weapon wasn't superior technology. It was institutional patience. The operation that captured Sentinel's Gate began 83 years earlier, with the first cultural exchange programs. Human strategists planted seeds knowing they wouldn't see the harvest. They trained operatives to maintain cover for decades. They built relationships that would only prove useful to their grandchildren. Advanced civilizations often develop longer temporal perspectives. Human strategic documents referenced century-long timelines. Their military academies taught campaigns lasting multiple generations. This allowed them to invest in intelligence gathering that wouldn't yield immediate returns. They studied alien psychology not for next quarter's tactical advantage, but for eventual strategic dominance. The alien focus on short-term gains created critical vulnerabilities. They evaluated threats based on immediate capabilities rather than long-term potential. They dismissed human civilization as primitive because current technology appeared inferior. They never calculated what humans might achieve. Given decades of focused development and infiltration, research, across military history consistently, shows that cultures with longer-term perspectives defeat short-term focused opponents. The patient hunter selects the perfect moment. The impatient hunter takes the first opportunity. Humans waited 83 years. The aliens couldn't wait 83 minutes without demanding visible progress. Human investment followed patient patterns. They placed operatives in menial positions that would take years to advance. They built trust through countless small interactions. They learned alien customs not to mimic but to understand. Their intelligence gathering focused on patterns that only revealed themselves across decades. Their patience created perfect timing. The takeover occurred during alien leadership transition cycles. It exploited scheduled maintenance windows. It utilized security procedure changes that humans had observed through 12 previous rotations. Every element aligned because humans had waited for optimal conditions. Time itself became the decisive weapon. While aliens measured success in quarterly reports, humans measured in generational progress. The operations architects had died years before its execution. Their successors inherited detailed plans and continued implementation, without altering the core strategy. This continuity of purpose across generations proved unstoppable. The resolution revealed the depth of strategic difference. The aliens prepared for tomorrow's battle. Humans prepared for their great-grandchildren's victory. This temporal mismatch made their defenses irrelevant. You cannot fortify against patience. You cannot detect determination that spans lifetimes. Their short-term focus prevented understanding this form of warfare. The generals looked for immediate threats rather than gradual infiltration. They monitored weapons development rather than cultural adaptation. They assessed current capabilities rather than future potential. This temporal blindness became their undoing. The understanding completed their psychological defeat. They realized they hadn't lost to superior technology or tactics. They had lost to a different relationship with time itself. Their magnificent fortress stood against immediate threats but crumbled against gradual pressure. The victory wasn't seized in a moment. It was collected after decades of careful preparation. This temporal perspective shift finalized their demoralization. They saw that human strategy operated on scales they couldn't comprehend. Their 5-year plan seemed childish against century-long operations. Their quarterly assessments appeared trivial next to generational planning. The defeat wasn't just military, it was philosophical. The patient hunter doesn't track the prey's current position. They study migration patterns across seasons. They learn feeding habits across years. They understand terrain across generations. The aliens focused on where the prey stood today. Humans knew where it would stand decades from now. This understanding settled over the captured generals like winter frost. They hadn't been outmaneuvered in space. They'd been outweighted in time. Their technology remained superior. Their weapons remained advanced. Their defeat came from facing an opponent who considered 83 years reasonable preparation for a single operation. The temporal mismatch proved more decisive than any technological advantage. They called it command unity. The alien generals began as a cohesive unit, their confidence reinforced by shared arrogance. They lounged together in their observation deck, exchanging dismissive comments about human inferiority. Their collective certainty formed an echo chamber where doubt found no entrance. This initial unity would prove their final vulnerability. As evidence accumulated, fractures appeared along individual psychological lines. The senior commander reacted with escalating anger, his belief in technological superiority crumbling into frustrated aggression. The strategic analyst showed increasing anxiety, his fingers trembling over control panels as patterns defied logical explanation. The cultural specialist retreated into silent contemplation, realizing too late the significance of folklore warnings. Advanced psychological operations targeted these individual vulnerabilities precisely. The human strategy identified which general relied on technology over intuition, which valued protocol over adaptation, which trusted systems over human judgment. Each received tailored psychological pressure through carefully calibrated events and comments. The weight test targeted the technologist. The baseball analogy targeted the strategist. The coin flip targeted the traditionalist. Their collective confidence had masked profound individual doubts. The anger covered fear of technological obsolescence. The anxiety concealed terror of unpredictable variables. The silence hid shame over cultural misreading. When the group dynamic fractured, these individual weaknesses emerged with devastating effect. Research consistently shows that group confidence crumbles fastest under psychological pressure. The scanner's crimson warning created the first crack. The dented floor widened it. The system takeover shattered it completely. Each general retreated into their personal crisis while the command structure disintegrated around them. Human strategy exploited this fragmentation with surgical precision. The calm demeanor amplified the angry general's frustration. The polite apologies deepened the analyst's confusion. The cultural references haunted the specialist's reconsideration. They weren't facing a unified strategy, but individualized psychological operations. Their military doctrine contained no countermeasures for this form of warfare. They trained for technological superiority, fleet engagements, planetary assaults. They never prepared for their own psychology becoming the battlefield. Their command manuals offered no guidance when confidence became liability and arrogance became vulnerability. The resolution arrived not as dramatic confrontation, but as quiet disintegration. The command structure collapsed from within before external pressure could be applied. The generals stopped communicating effectively. They issued contradictory orders. They questioned each other's assessments. Their unity dissolved into individual survival strategies. This psychological unraveling completed their strategic defeat. The human teams encountered no coordinated resistance because command cohesion had already failed. Alien security forces received conflicting instructions. System operators faced contradictory priorities. The magnificent military machine stalled not from external damage but from internal confusion. The transition occurred in the space between doubt and panic. Each general reached their breaking point separately. The technologist stared at controls that no longer responded. The strategist watched patterns that defied analysis. The traditionalist reconsidered cultural assumptions that proved catastrophically wrong. Their individual realizations collectively destroyed command effectiveness. Psychological warfare achieved what physical force couldn't. It turned strength into weakness, unity into fragmentation, confidence into paralysis. The humans didn't need to defeat their technology when they could defeat their minds. The fortress stood physically intact but psychologically conquered. This individual breakdown demonstrated the ultimate failure of their military philosophy. They had built magnificent weapons but fragile minds. They had trained for external threats but internal stability. They had valued technology over psychology, power over understanding, arrogance over awareness. The final silence in the command center spoke volumes. The generals sat separately, each trapped in their personal realization of defeat. Their communication systems remained technically functional, but psychologically useless. They had nothing left to say to each other, no common ground remaining. The unity that had been their strength became their fracture lines. This psychological defeat set up the final cultural realization. As the generals sat in isolated contemplation, they began re-examining every interaction, every assessment, every assumption. The woman's polite comments, the scanner's warning, the folklore references, all took on new meanings in their isolated reconsiderations. They called it primitive interpretation. The alien assessment of human culture landed at a single conclusion: straightforward, simplistic, and lacking strategic depth. Their analysts categorized human stories as mere entertainment, social customs as basic survival mechanisms, art as crude emotional expression. This assessment formed the bedrock of their catastrophic misjudgment. They believed they understood humanity because they could translate its languages, never realizing translation and comprehension occupied different planets. Human culture functions as a multi-layered signaling system where nothing means only what it appears to mean. Politeness serves as tactical positioning. Folklore contains survival algorithms. Sports analogies convey military doctrine. The aliens missed the strategic depth because they looked for obvious meaning rather than embedded significance. Their analytical tools decoded vocabulary but couldn't interpret context. Advanced civilizations consistently develop complex cultural communication methods. The human tendency toward indirect expression, metaphor, irony, understatement, represented evolutionary sophistication, not primitivism. The aliens' assessment tools treated these complexities as noise rather than signal. They filtered out the very information that would have revealed human strategic thinking. Research across diplomatic history demonstrates that cultural misunderstanding causes more conflicts than technological gaps. The aliens prepared for language barriers but never considered meaning barriers. They could ask for directions in perfect alien-toned English but couldn't recognize when they were being warned, threatened, or manipulated through cultural references. Humans wielded cultural elements as both shield and weapon. The polite apology deflected attention while positioning strategically. The baseball analogy described doctrine while appearing to make small talk. The worn coin disguised a synchronization device as sentimental artifact. Each cultural reference served dual purposes, appearing harmless while carrying tactical significance. Their intelligence failure proved fundamentally cultural rather than technological. They possessed perfect translation software, but no cultural interpretation algorithms. They could analyze human weapon systems but couldn't decipher human storytelling. This gap rendered their technological superiority meaningless. Understanding missile ranges matters less than understanding the mind launching them. The resolution revealed their cultural arrogance as their greatest vulnerability. Their belief in their own cultural superiority prevented serious engagement with human complexity. They dismissed subtlety as primitivism and indirect communication as evolutionary lack. This arrogance created the perfect blind spot for human strategy to operate within. The baseball analogy exemplified this cultural misread. The generals heard a sports reference. They missed the precise description of human military doctrine, standing politely until something gets hurled at you, then returning it with calculated force. Their literal interpretation cost them strategic awareness. They focused on the game rather than the doctrine. Every interaction reinforced this pattern. The woman's calm demeanor read as submission rather than control. The folklore references registered as superstition rather than warning systems. The technological humility appeared as inferiority rather than tactical choice. Their cultural framework reversed all meanings, turning threats into trivialities and warnings into amusement. This cultural failure led directly to the final strategic realization. As the generals sat in their captured command center, they began reinterpreting every interaction through new understanding. The polite apology became tactical positioning. The weight test became capability demonstration. The coin flip became synchronization signal. Their cultural reassessment changed everything except the outcome. The transition occurred in their minds rather than the physical space. The fortress stood unchanged around them, but its meaning had transformed completely. They realized they hadn't lost to superior technology, but to superior cultural intelligence. Humans hadn't defeated their weapons, they'd defeated their understanding. They called it a misunderstanding. The alien generals finally pieced together the complete strategic picture, the fragments of evidence clicking into place with brutal clarity. The polite apologies, the calm demeanor, the folklore references. Every interaction wasn't just observation. It was calculated operation. The woman hadn't been processing through their security checkpoint. She'd been conducting their security evaluation. Advanced strategy often wears the mask of its opposite until the final moment. What appeared as weakness was controlled demonstration. What sounded like apology was tactical positioning. The duffel bag wasn't luggage, it was psychological camouflage. The coin wasn't currency, it was synchronization device. Their cognitive biases filtered every signal through layers of arrogant assumption, turning warnings into amusement and threats into curiosities. Research across intelligence communities consistently shows pattern recognition. Failure precedes catastrophic breakdowns. The generals saw disconnected events, a scanner malfunction, a strong human, a sports reference. They never connected them into coherent strategy. Their assessment framework was fundamentally flawed because it couldn't process humility as strength or patience as weapon. The humans were never pleading for recognition or mercy. They were hunting with generational patience. The polite stance wasn't submission. It was the waiting position before returning force with precision. The calm demeanor wasn't lack of awareness, it was absolute control. Their apparent technological inferiority wasn't limitation, it was tactical choice. Their entire assessment framework proved wrong because it measured the wrong things. They evaluated visible weapons rather than invisible strategy. They counted warships rather than understanding cultural patterns. They assessed current capabilities rather than long-term potential. The framework was perfect for the threat they imagined and useless against the threat they faced. The resolution arrived as cold understanding. They finally saw the predator that was present from the beginning. The woman standing patiently in line wasn't a harmless biological entity. She was the focal point of an operation spanning decades. The scanner hadn't malfunctioned. It had recognized what their commanders refused to see. This realization completed their defeat more thoroughly than any physical conquest. Their confidence shattered not from external force but from internal understanding. They hadn't lost to superior technology, but to superior comprehension. Their magnificent systems remained intact, but their strategic worldview lay in ruins. The transition occurred in their minds. They replayed every interaction with new awareness. The weight test wasn't demonstration, it was capability assessment. The baseball analogy wasn't small talk, it was doctrinal explanation. The coin flip wasn't sentimental gesture, it was operational trigger. Each moment took on its true significance, revealing the pattern they'd missed. Pattern recognition failure stems from expecting patterns to match previous experience. The generals looked for familiar threat profiles, aggressive posturing, technological display, military formation. They never considered that advanced strategy might appear as its opposite. Their experience became their limitation rather than their advantage. The humans exploited this expectation gap perfectly. They presented exactly what alien prejudice demanded to see: polite inferiority, technological simplicity, cultural primitivism. The disguise was so complete that even their own systems recognized the threat before their commanders did. The scanners saw through the camouflage their minds refused to penetrate. This final understanding settled over them like winter. They realized they hadn't been defeated by force but by perception. The predator was always there, visible in every interaction, recognizable in every signal. Their arrogance had been the blindfold preventing them from seeing what their own technology detected immediately. The realization completed their psychological surrender. Physical resistance became meaningless when their strategic framework had collapsed. They saw that every assumption, every assessment, every decision had been wrong. The victory wasn't just military, it was intellectual. They hadn't just lost their fortress. They'd lost their understanding of how the universe worked. This cognitive defeat set the stage for the new order. The rules of power hadn't changed. Their understanding of those rules had been incomplete. They finally saw that true strength often wears the face of its opposite until the moment it doesn't. The patient hunter doesn't need to roar when silence serves better. They called it permanent dominance. The alien empire believed its power structure was eternal, built on technological supremacy and military might that no civilization could challenge. Their confidence wasn't arrogance, it was mathematical certainty, based on fleet sizes, weapon yields, and defensive capabilities. This certainty became their ultimate miscalculation. The shift occurred without a single shot fired, without a single hull breached, without any of the dramatic confrontations their doctrine had prepared for. Human strategy demonstrated that patience and intelligence outweigh brute force in sustained conflict. The aliens had prepared for explosive confrontations and magnificent battles. They never considered victory through gradual accumulation of advantage. Their military doctrine contained no protocols for this form of warfare, because they couldn't imagine winning without fighting. They built magnificent weapons while humans built deeper understanding. Advanced civilizations often rise through subtlety rather than overt conquest. The human approach reflected this evolutionary pattern. They didn't seek to destroy the existing order, but to understand it completely. Their victory came not from overwhelming force, but from perfect comprehension of their opponent's weaknesses, both technological and psychological. This approach required more time, but yielded more complete results. Research across galactic history shows that power transitions frequently occur through non-military means. Economic influence, cultural assimilation, and strategic positioning often prove more decisive than fleet engagements. The humans applied these principles with generational patience. They didn't confront the Empire's strength. They gradually surrounded it with understanding. The new galactic order emerged from different principles than the old. Human leadership valued comprehension over control, patience over impulse, intelligence over intimidation. Their administration focused on systemic stability, rather than dramatic displays of power. The transition felt less like conquest and more like ownership transfer. The systems continued functioning, the populations continued their lives, but the underlying philosophy changed completely. Their victory came from understanding rather than destroying. Human operatives spent decades learning alien psychology, technology, and culture. They didn't seek to break systems but to master them. This approach preserved infrastructure, minimized casualties, and created stability rather than chaos. The aliens had focused on how to defeat enemies. Humans focused on how to understand them. The rules of power were permanently rewritten that day. Military dominance no longer guaranteed security. Technological superiority no longer ensured victory. The new calculus valued patience over aggression, intelligence over force, understanding over destruction. This represented not just a change in leadership, but a fundamental shift in how power was understood and exercised. The transition demonstrated that true strength often appears as its opposite until the final moment. The patient hunter doesn't need to roar. The intelligent strategist doesn't require dramatic demonstrations. The aliens had measured power in visible terms: ship sizes, weapon ranges, fortress strength. Humans measured it in less visible terms: psychological insight, cultural understanding, strategic patience. This shift leads to the final lesson about true strength. The galaxy learned that predators come in many forms, and the most dangerous often smile politely while waiting for the perfect moment. The Empire's magnificence became its vulnerability. Its arrogance became its weakness. Its visible power became its target. Humanity's greatest advantage proved to be their different relationship with time itself. While aliens planned quarterly campaigns, humans planned century-long operations. This temporal mismatch made alien defenses irrelevant against an opponent willing to wait generations for victory. The patience itself became the weapon that broke their strategic framework. The new order didn't require destruction of the old systems. It required their comprehension. Human technicians now operated alien technology with perfect efficiency. The fortress continued its functions under new management. The transition was so seamless that external observers noticed only philosophical changes in command decisions. The victory was complete yet virtually invisible. This demonstrated that true power lies in understanding your opponent better than they understand themselves. The aliens knew everything about human technology but nothing about human strategy. Humans knew everything about alien psychology and enough about alien technology to take control of it. This knowledge imbalance proved more decisive than any weapons disparity. The galaxy's power structure shifted on an axis the aliens hadn't known existed. Their magnificent fortress stood intact but served different masters. Their advanced technology functioned perfectly but answered different commands. Their military personnel remained alive but followed different strategies. The change was profound yet peaceful, comprehensive yet subtle. The predator that smiles remains a predator, simply one sophisticated enough to win without roaring. True power lies not in visible strength, but in understanding your opponent better than they understand themselves. The alien commanders knew human weapon ranges but missed the strategic patience behind them. Sometimes the most advanced weapon is generations of observation, and the strongest defense is the humility to question your own assumptions. Their fortress fell to comprehension, not destruction. The galaxy's rules have changed. Victory no longer belongs to the strongest, but to those who understand what strength truly means. Her calmness itself became a weapon. While they lounged in their commanding positions, she stood perfectly still, her breathing even, her hands visible. No nervous gestures, no defensive posturing. This unnatural calm should have signaled control, not submission. Instead, they interpreted it as lack of awareness. They saw a primitive creature unaware of its insignificance rather than a professional executing a planned operation. The resolution became clear in retrospect. Civility served as both armor and misdirection. Her polite words distracted from her observational patterns. Her apology covered her assessment of their security layout. Her humble posture concealed her calculation of response times and threat distances. She used their expectations as camouflage. This misinterpretation set up the first physical test. Confident in their assessment of human weakness, one general decided to demonstrate their technological superiority. He ordered a guard to bring a weight calibration sphere to the inspection area. The polished metal globe served as both tool and symbol, their advanced materials science against primitive human biology. They expected her to struggle with its mass, to show physical inferiority that would confirm their assessment. The test seemed like a simple demonstration of dominance. It became something else entirely. They called it a simple demonstration. The guard brought forward a polished metallic sphere used for calibrating gravity fields. To the alien generals watching from above, this represented another opportunity to showcase their technological superiority. The sphere appeared deceptively small, but contained mass manipulation technology that made it weigh nearly half a metric ton. They expected the human woman to struggle with it, to show physical limitation that would confirm their assessment of human weakness. The test seemed routine, almost casual in its arrogance. She accepted the sphere with both hands. Her posture didn't change. No straining muscles, no shift in balance. She held the impossibly dense object as if it were made of polystyrene. Then she set it down. Not placed, set. The sphere contacted the polished floor with a sound that wasn't loud so much as final. The impact dented the reinforced plating, creating a perfect circular depression exactly matching the sphere's circumference. The metal groaned in protest, then settled into its new deformed shape. Her only comment was a quiet, "Oh dear." The words hung in the air, perfectly calibrated between apology and commentary. The understatement wasn't accidental. It served as psychological punctuation to the physical demonstration. She had just invalidated their entire understanding of human physical capability while maintaining the facade of polite concern. Advanced materials science had created enhancements that defied visible indicators. Human biomechanical improvements didn't show as obvious cybernetics or bulky augmentations. The generals had assessed human physical limitations based on baseline biology. They failed to account for subtle reinforcement at cellular level, for carbon nanotube weaving through muscle tissue, for gravitational adaptation that allowed operation in multiple environments. Their technology assessment was years out of date because they'd stopped serious study once they deemed humans technologically inferior. The floor damage demonstrated precision, not just power. The sphere created a perfect impression exactly where she placed it. No cracking radiating outward. No collateral damage to surrounding area. This indicated control down to millimeter accuracy. She could have shattered the entire bay floor. Instead, she made a single statement exactly where it would be most visible to the observers above. The dent became a symbol their arrogance couldn't ignore. Research across military history consistently shows that underestimating physical capability leads to catastrophic miscalculations. Armies assume enemies share their limitations. Security forces design restraints for expected strength levels. The most successful special operations often involve capabilities the enemy believed physically impossible. The generals had prepared for human soldiers with human limitations. They hadn't prepared for whatever this was. The resolution became unavoidably clear. Their defensive assumptions were fundamentally flawed. They'd designed their security protocols, their physical confrontations, their entire threat assessment around capabilities that no longer applied. The woman standing before them represented a physical paradigm they hadn't accounted for. Their technology couldn't measure her because they hadn't thought to look for what she represented. This physical proof forced the first cracks in their confidence. The generals stopped lounging in their chairs. They leaned forward, their amusement replaced by focused attention. The junior officers in the control bay fell silent. The crimson scanner warning no longer seemed like malfunction. The folklore references no longer seemed primitive. The polite apology no longer seemed submissive. Each element clicked into place, forming a new picture they suddenly realized they should have seen earlier. The woman retrieved her duffel bag from the conveyor as if nothing had happened. She glanced toward the observation deck, her expression still neutral. Then she spoke again, her voice carrying clearly through the suddenly quiet bay. "You know baseball, I assume?" The question seemed absurd in context. Another non sequitur. Another piece that didn't fit their expected patterns. They called it casual conversation. The woman stood beside the weight-dented floor, her duffel bag in hand, and asked about baseball as if discussing the weather. "You know the game, I assume?" The generals exchanged glances, some irritated, some amused. Another human oddity. Another distraction. They missed the military doctrine being delivered in plain language. Baseball isn't about aggression. It's about waiting. The batter stands politely at home plate, hands resting on the bat, appearing completely passive. The stance looks almost deferential, but this quiet posture contains explosive potential. The player watches the pitcher wind up, calculates velocity and spin, determines trajectory. The politeness is the calm before the calibrated response. The swing doesn't come until the ball is already in motion. Human strategic doctrine mirrors this exact pattern. Their diplomatic corps maintains polite relations even with adversaries. Their military exercises restraint until provoked. The appearance of passivity isn't weakness, it's observation time. They let opponents reveal capabilities, intentions, and patterns before committing to action. The generals saw patience where they should have seen preparation. Sports often function as cultural training mechanisms. Societies play games that reinforce strategic values. Baseball teaches delayed response, pattern recognition, and returning force with precision rather than brute strength. The human woman wasn't making small talk. She was explaining their entire operational philosophy to commanders too arrogant to listen. The generals took the analogy literally. One of them snorted, "We have no time for primitive ball games." They dismissed the reference as cultural trivia rather than strategic briefing. Their intelligence analysts had cataloged human sports as recreational activities rather than tactical training. They failed to see the connection between athletic discipline and military doctrine. The politeness she referenced wasn't social convention. It described the waiting stance humanity adopts before decisive action. Their entire history shows this pattern. Prolonged periods of observation and diplomacy followed by sudden, precise applications of force when boundaries are crossed. The patient hunter doesn't roar, it watches until the moment is perfect. Research across military academies consistently shows that societies which train patience through games produce more effective strategists. The ability to wait, to observe, to resist immediate reaction, these become strategic advantages against impulsive opponents. The aliens valued swift action and visible dominance. They couldn't comprehend strategic waiting as a form of power. The resolution became clear too late. The baseball analogy perfectly described humanity's reaction-based warfare doctrine. They don't initiate conflict. They absorb aggression, analyze it, then return it with devastating precision. The woman had literally told them how her species fought wars. They heard a sports reference instead of a tactical warning. This misunderstanding led directly to the intelligence revelation. Confident in their assessment of human simplicity, the generals decided to demonstrate their surveillance capabilities. They began describing their observation of human military developments, their tracking of ship movements, their analysis of weapons testing. They believed they were showcasing their superior intelligence gathering. They didn't realize they were revealing exactly what humanity wanted to know, how much the aliens understood, and more importantly, what they had missed.